A young woman asks a millionaire for help on Christmas Eve. The next day, he sees her at his wife's grave. Fifth Avenue shimmered with 1,000 lights, but for John Blackwell, Christmas Eve was only a painful reminder of his loss. At 60, the once powerful CEO of Blackwell Industries walked alone, his impeccable suit a stark contrast to the festive cheer surrounding him. Snowflakes danced in the frigid New York air, settling softly on his shoulders. John stopped abruptly, his eyes fixed on a jewelry store window. There, a diamond necklace identical to the one he'd given Helen for Christmas last year glittered, mocking his grief. "Helen," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the city's din. 1 year, 365 days since illness had taken his wife. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. Flashback. The hospital room was silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of machines. Helen, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed fragile as porcelain. John held her hand, his knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. "Mount John," Helen whispered, her blue eyes meeting his. "Promise me you'll keep living, really living." He nodded, unable to speak. The beeping became a continuous tone, and Helen was gone, taking John's heart with her. Back in the present, John shook his head, dispelling the memory. He resumed his solitary walk, his footsteps echoing on the nearly deserted sidewalk. Then he heard it. "Please, sir, please help me." John turned, irritated by the interruption. A young woman, no older than 12, ran towards him. Her worn coat and hole-ridden shoes clashed starkly with the luxury of Fifth Avenue. "What do you want?" John asked, his voice sharp as the December wind. The girl stopped, breathless. Her eyes, large and expressive, met John's. For a moment, his breath caught. Those eyes, they were identical to Helen's. "My name is Sophie," she said, her voice trembling. "My mom is very sick. We need money for her medicine. Please, even a little would help." John hardened his heart. He'd heard 1,000 stories like this before. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," he said, turning to leave. "Wait," Sophie cried, clutching his coat sleeve. "Please, it's Christmas. My mum, she might not make it through the night without her medicine." Something in the girl's voice made John stop. He turned slowly, studying Sophie's face. There was desperation in her eyes, yes, but also a fierce determination he recognized immediately. It was the same look Helen had when she set her mind to something. For a moment, John was paralyzed. It was as if fate was playing a cruel trick on him. Here he was, a year after losing Helen, confronted by a child who seemed to carry a piece of his late wife. "How much?" he heard himself ask, his voice hoarse. Sophie's eyes widened with hope. $200, she murmured, as if afraid the number would scare him away. Without hesitation, John pulled out his wallet. He took out several $100 bills and handed 5 to Sophie. $500 too, he said, his voice softer than it had been in months. "I buy the medicine and some food too." Sophie took the money with trembling hands, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "God bless you." Before John could reply, Sophie turned and ran, disappearing into the throng of last-minute shoppers. He stood there motionless as if struck by lightning. For the first time in a year, something other than grief and bitterness stirred in his chest. It was a strange, almost forgotten sensation. Hope. As he resumed his walk, John couldn't help but wonder if this encounter was a mere coincidence or something more. Helen's voice echoed in his mind. "Promise me you'll keep living." Really living? Maybe, John thought. As the snow continued to fall softly around him, it was time to keep that promise. Christmas morning dawned cold and grey over New York. John Blackwell adjusted his cashmere scarf as he walked through the ornate gates of Woodlawn Cemetery. His usually firm and decisive steps faltered with each meter that brought him closer to Helen's grave. It was the first time he'd returned since the funeral a year ago. Guilt weighed on his shoulders like a lead cloak. For months, he'd convinced himself that staying away was a way of preserving Helen's memory. Now, he realized it was nothing but cowardice. The crunch of freshly fallen snow beneath his shoes was the only sound in the silent morning. John stopped dead in his tracks. In the distance, a lone figure knelt before Helen's grave. His heart quickened. Who else would visit his wife on Christmas morning? He approached cautiously, curiosity overriding his initial hesitation. The figure was small, wrapped in a worn coat that seemed too large. As he got closer, the person stood and turned. John froze. It was her. The young woman from the night before, Sophie. Their eyes met, the shock evident on both their faces. For a moment, neither moved, as if breaking the silence might dispel this surreal scene. It was Sophie who spoke first. "Mr. Blackwell?" Her voice was a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Did you know Mrs. Blackwell?" The question hit John like a slap. How did this girl know his wife's name? And why did she speak of her with such familiarity? "Helen was my wife," he replied, his voice harsher than he intended. "The question is, how did you know her?" Sophie took a step back, visibly intimidated by John's intensity. Her eyes, the same ones that had so reminded him of Helen the night before, now shimmered with unshed tears. "Mrs. Blackwell was my tutor," she said softly. "Last year, before she got sick." John felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Helen, a tutor. His wife had never mentioned anything about teaching. What else didn't he know? Impossible," he murmured, more to himself than to Sophie. "Helen was never a tutor. But the words died in his throat. He realized, with painful clarity, how little he knew about his wife's daily life during that last year. Sophie, sensing John's confusion, continued. "She volunteered at the community center in Harlem. Mr. Blackwell. After school, tutoring kids. Harlem." A world away from their Upper East Side penthouse, John felt a wave of shame. How could he have been so oblivious to Helen's activities? "Why didn't she ever tell me?" The question escaped his lips before he could contain it. Sophie hesitated, biting her lower lip. She said she wanted to do something meaningful. Something that was just hers. The words hit John like a punch to the gut. Helen had felt the need to hide this from him. What did that say about their marriage? About him as a husband? "What else?" he asked, his voice now barely a whisper. "What else did she do?" Sophie looked at Helen's grave, as if seeking permission to speak. Then, the words began to flow. "Mrs. Blackwell wasn't just our tutor. She brought us food when we didn't have anything to eat. She bought school supplies for those who couldn't afford them. Once, she even paid our family's rent when we were about to be evicted." John listened, stunned. Each word Sophie spoke painted a portrait of Helen he barely recognized. A Helen full of compassion, generosity, and determination. A Helen that he, in his obsession with work and social status, had never truly known. "She talked about you, you know," Sophie continued, her voice softer now. "She said you were a good man, but that you sometimes lost your way. She believed that one day you would find your true purpose." The tears John had been holding back for a year finally flowed. He fell to his knees in the snow, sobs racking his body. Sophie, hesitantly, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Blackwell," she said gently. "Mrs. Blackwell changed our lives. She gave us hope when we had nothing left. And she did it all because she believed it was the right thing to do." John looked up, meeting Sophie's compassionate gaze. In that moment, he saw Helen reflected in this young woman, not just in her eyes, but in her kindness, in her strength. "Why are you here today, Sophie?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I promised her I'd come every Christmas," Sophie replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. "To thank her and to keep her memory alive." John slowly rose, brushing the snow off his trousers. He looked at Helen's grave, the fresh flowers Sophie had brought contrasting with the cold marble. "Sophie," he said, his voice firm for the first time that morning, "would you tell me more about Helen, about her work, about the people she helped?" Sophie's face lit up. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. There's so much to tell." As the two left the cemetery side by side, John felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a purpose. Helen had left a legacy, a call to action he could no longer ignore. The snow began to fall again, soft and silent. John looked up at the grey sky, a thought crystallizing in his mind. Maybe it wasn't too late to keep the promise he had made to Helen. Maybe With the unexpected help of a young woman named Sophie, he could truly begin to live. And so, on that cold Christmas morning, among the snow-covered graves and newly discovered memories, the hope of redemption was born. John Blackwell's office, atop the Blackwell Tower, had always been his sanctuary. Now, however, the walls of glass and steel seemed to suffocate him. Since his encounter with Sophie at the cemetery, a disquiet had settled in his chest, impossible to ignore. With trembling fingers, John opened Helen's laptop, untouched for a year. The screen flickered to life, revealing a photo of them from their last trip to Venice. His eyes burned as he saw Helen's radiant smile, so full of life. "What were you hiding from me, darling?" he murmured, beginning his search. The first few hours were frustrating. Emails about dinners, social engagements, nothing unusual. Then, something caught his eye. A folder titled Project Phoenix. John clicked, and a new world opened before him. Flashback. 11 months earlier, Helen entered John's office, her pale face a stark contrast to the red of her lipstick. "Honey, can we talk?" she asked, her voice slightly trembling. John barely looked up from the documents in front of him. "Not now, Helen. I'm in the middle of a crucial negotiation." Helen hesitated, biting her lip. "It's important, John. It's about the company. I heard something today that worries me." Finally, John looked at her, irritation evident in his eyes. "Helen, you know I don't like mixing our private life with business. I'm sure it's nothing you need to worry about." Helen's face closed, a shadow passing over her eyes. "Of course, you're right. Sorry to bother you." She exited silently, leaving John immersed in his work, oblivious to the missed opportunity. Back in the present, John felt a pang of remorse. How many times had he pushed her away like that? Continuing his search, he found a text file. It was a diary. Heart pounding, he began to read. "January 15th. I heard something disturbing at the gala tonight. Blackwell's new project in Harlem. It's not what it seems. I need to investigate." The following entries detailed Helen's growing concern. Mentions of mass evictions, official corruption, and dangerous working conditions jumped off the screen. John felt nauseous. How could this be happening in his company without his knowledge? Flashback. 6 months earlier, Helen was in the garden, her favorite refuge. John watched her from the window, noticing how much thinner and paler she seemed. "Helen," he called, finally stepping outside to join her. "Is everything all right?" She turned, a tired smile on her lips. "Just thinking, honey. Have you ever wondered if we're doing enough? If our lives have a real purpose?" John frowned. "What are you talking about? We have everything we could ever want." Helen sighed, looking at the roses she cultivated with such care. "Maybe. But sometimes, I wonder if we shouldn't do more for others, not just for ourselves." John laughed, uncomfortable. "You're getting philosophical, darling. How about we go out to dinner tonight? That'll cheer you up." Helen simply nodded, her gaze distant. John didn't realize it then, but that moment marked the beginning of a profound change in his wife. John continued reading the diary, each entry revealing more about Helen's secret life. Her tutoring sessions, her anonymous donations, her nights spent researching social justice and corporate responsibility. Then he found it. A letter, saved as a draft, never sent. "My dearest John, if you're reading this, it means I either found the courage to tell you the truth or something happened to me. For months, I've been investigating Blackwell Industries' practices, and what I've discovered makes me sick with worry and shame. The Harlem Project is not what it seems. We're evicting families, destroying neighborhoods, all in the name of profit. And there's worse, much worse. Bribery, falsified safety reports, worker exploitation. I know you're not directly involved, but your obsession with the company's success has blinded you to what's happening right under your nose. Anthony, your partner and best friend, is at the heart of it all. I tried to tell you so many times, but you never wanted to listen. So I decided to act on my own. Project Phoenix is my attempt to undo some of the damage we've caused. It might be naive, but I have to try. John, you're a good man, I know that in my heart, but you've lost your way. I hope that when you discover the truth, you'll do what's right, not just for others, but for yourself. I love you always. Helen. John dropped the laptop, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The truth hit him like a speeding train. Helen knew. She had tried to warn him, and he had ignored her. Now, sitting alone in his office at the top of the world, John Blackwell faced the painful reality. His pursuit of success had blinded him not only to the ills of his company, but also to the slow decline of his marriage and the woman he loved. Tears in his eyes, he looked at the photo of Helen on his desk. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but I'm going to fix this, I promise." And so, in the quiet of his office, John began to plan how to dismantle the empire he had spent his life building, determined to honor Helen's legacy and, perhaps, find redemption. The small apartment in the heart of Harlem could barely be called a home. Crumbling walls, a window that wouldn't close completely, letting in the biting cold of the New York winter. But for Sophie and her mother, Elise, it was all they had. Sophie, just 12 years old, stirred a pot of thin soup on the ancient stove. The smell of onions and potatoes filled the air, masking the musty odor that seemed to permeate the walls. "Mom," she called softly, looking at the sofa bed where Elise rested. "It's time for your medicine." Elise slowly opened her eyes, a faint smile lighting up her pale face. "Thank you, sweetheart. What would I do without you?" Sophie helped her mother sit up, offering her a glass of water and her pill. Her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from worry. The medicine was running low, and the money Mr. Blackwell had given her on Christmas Eve wouldn't last forever. As Elise took her medicine, Sophie couldn't help but think back to the day everything had changed, a little over a year ago. Flashback. The community center buzzed with activity that autumn afternoon. Sophie, then 11, peeked through the door of the makeshift classroom, curious about the new volunteer everyone was talking about. That's when she saw her for the first time, Helen Blackwell, with her brown hair tied in a loose bun and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. She gestured animatedly, explaining something about fractions to a group of captivated children. Sophie was about to turn away when Helen noticed her. "Hello there," she called out warmly. "Would you like to join us?" Hesitantly, Sophie entered the room. Helen approached, kneeling down to be at the girl's level. "What's your name, sweetie?" "Sophie," she murmured, suddenly shy. Helen's smile widened. "What a beautiful name. Do you know what it means? Wisdom. I bet you're a very smart girl." In that instant, something changed in Sophie. For the first time in a long time, she felt special. Back in the present, Sophie blinked back the tears that threatened to spill. Helen had been much more than a tutor. She had been a beacon of hope in their lives. "What are you thinking about, honey?" Elise asked softly, noticing Sophie's distant expression. "Mrs. Blackwell," she replied, serving her mother some soup. "I miss her so much." Elise nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "She was an angel, Sophie. Without her, I don't know what we would have done." Sophie sat beside her mother, remembering all the times Helen had coincidentally appeared with bags of groceries, or how, mysteriously, the rent had been paid when they were on the verge of eviction. "Mom," Sophie began hesitantly, "is there anything you never told me about Mrs. Blackwell? Why she helped us so much?" Elise remained silent for a long moment, as if carefully weighing her next words. "Sophie, sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you," she finally said. "Mrs. Blackwell, she wasn't just helping us. She was investigating something big and dangerous." Sophie's eyes widened. "Investigating? What?" Elise sighed deeply. Her husband's company, Blackwell Industries. Helen discovered they were doing terrible things here in Harlem: illegal evictions, dangerous working conditions on construction sites, bribes. Sophie was speechless. Mr. Blackwell, the man she had seen at the cemetery, seemed so sad and remorseful. How could he be involved in such things? But why was she investigating her own husband's company? She asked, confused. "Because she believed it was the right thing to do," Elise replied softly. "Helen told me her husband didn't know anything. She wanted to gather evidence before telling him." Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine. "Mum, do you think that has something to do with her death?" Elise paled visibly. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope not. But the last few times I saw her, Helen seemed scared, as if she was carrying a heavy burden. Silence fell over the small apartment, heavy and oppressive. Sophie looked out the window, watching the snowflakes begin to fall. Her mind raced. Suddenly she stood up, a fierce determination shining in her eyes. "Mom, I have to do something," she said firmly. "I have to talk to Mr. Blackwell again." Elise looked at her, worried. "Sophie, I don't know if that's a good idea. It could be dangerous." But Sophie was already grabbing her coat. Mrs. Blackwell trusted him. "Mom," she believed he was a good man. What if she was right? What if he can help us finish what she started? Elise hesitated, visibly torn between fear and hope. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but promise me you'll be careful." Sophie hugged her mother tightly. "I promise, Mom. I'll make Mrs. Blackwell proud of us." As she prepared to leave, Sophie looked at the small makeshift altar they had created for Helen, a smiling photo of her, surrounded by candles and artificial flowers. "I'll continue your work, Mrs. Blackwell," she whispered. "I promise." After one last look at her mother, Sophie stepped out into the cold New York night. Her destination, the imposing Blackwell Tower. Her goal, to convince John Blackwell to listen to the truth his wife had desperately tried to reveal. Walking through the icy streets, Sophie felt the weight of responsibility on her young shoulders. But she also felt something more: hope. The hope that somehow she could make a difference. The hope that Helen's legacy could live on through her. And so, with determined steps, Sophie advanced towards the unknown, carrying within her the dreams and struggles of an entire community. The game was about to change, and a 12-year-old girl from Harlem would be the catalyst. John Blackwell's office, once a symbol of his power and success, now felt like a prison. Stacks of documents covered every available surface. Computer screens flickered with charts and spreadsheets, and the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and despair. John, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble shadowing his jaw, frantically searched through Blackwell Industries archives. Each new discovery was like a dagger to his heart. "My God, Helen," he murmured, running a hand through his graying hair. "How could I have let this happen?" A particularly disturbing report caught his attention. It concerned the Harlem New Revitalization Project. The words jumped off the page: forced displacement, inadequate compensation, safety violations. Hands trembling, John opened a folder of photos attached to the report. His heart nearly stopped. There, among the images of demolished buildings and evicted families, was a familiar face. Sophie. The young woman stood in front of a condemned building, tears in her eyes, holding the hand of a woman who could only be her mother. The caption read, "Residents of 7 Lilac Street, evicted March 15th. "No," John whispered, the reality of the situation finally hitting him with full force. "What have I done?" At that moment, his phone rang. It was security at the front desk. "Mr. Blackwell, there's a young woman insisting on seeing you. She says her name is Sophie." John froze. Fate had a cruel sense of humor. "Send her up," he ordered, his voice hoarse. While he waited, John tried to compose himself. He washed his face, adjusted his tie, but nothing could mask the turmoil in his eyes. The elevator announced Sophie's arrival with a soft ding. The doors opened, and there she was, small, determined, with eyes that held a wisdom beyond her years. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice slightly trembling. "Sophie," John replied, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "Please, come in." He led her inside the office, watching her eyes widen at the chaotic scene. "Are you all right, Mr. Blackwell?" Sophie asked, genuinely concerned. John laughed bitterly. "No, Sophie, I'm not all right at all." He paused, gathering his courage. "But I think you already know that, don't you?" Sophie nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on his. "It's about Mrs. Blackwell, isn't it? About what she discovered." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. He stumbled to his chair and sank into it heavily. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you know?" Sophie stepped closer, her small hand hesitantly resting on John's arm. "Mrs. Blackwell trusted my mother. She told us some things." John closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years of neglect and willful blindness. When he opened them again, a fierce determination shone within. "Sophie, I need you to tell me everything. Absolutely everything Helen told you. What she did, what she discovered. Please." And so, in that office high above New York City, a 12-year-old girl from Harlem began to unravel the secrets that had cost Helen Blackwell her life. Sophie spoke of the tutoring sessions, how Helen had uncovered Blackwell Industries' questionable practices through the stories of her students. She recounted the evenings Helen arrived with food and supplies, always insisting it was just a coincidence. She was always taking notes, Sophie recalled. Names, dates, details about the evictions and workplace accidents. She said she was gathering evidence. John listened, each word a fresh wound. How could he have been so blind? How had he not noticed what was happening right under his nose? Towards the end, Sophie continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, Mrs. Blackwell seemed scared. She told us to be careful, not to trust anyone from the company. John abruptly stood and walked to the window. The city sprawled below, glittering and imposing. How many lives had been destroyed in the name of progress and profit? "Sophie," he finally said, turning to face her, "do you know what happened to Helen? Do you think her death wasn't an accident?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sophie looked at her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know," she admitted. But the last time I saw her, she said she was about to reveal everything, that she was going to tell you, and together, you would fix things." John felt his legs weaken. He leaned against his desk, his mind reeling with the implications. Helen was about to tell him everything, and then, "Mr. Blackwell," Sophie's voice brought him back to the present. "And what are we going to do now?" John looked at the young woman, seeing in her the courage and determination that Helen had so admired. At that moment, he made a decision. "We're going to finish what Helen started," he declared, his voice firm for the first time in days. "And we're going to expose the truth, whatever the consequences." Sophie smiled, a smile so reminiscent of Helen's that John's heart ached. "Mrs. Blackwell would be proud," she said softly. John nodded, feeling a mixture of pain and resolve. Yes, she would. "And that's why we have to do this right." He turned back to the computer screens, his mind already planning the next steps. "Sophie, I need you to tell me more. Every detail, no matter how insignificant it seems. Together, we're going to unravel this." And so, on that cold winter night, an unlikely duo, a guilt-ridden business tycoon and a courageous young woman from Harlem, began to dismantle the lies and corruption that had infiltrated Blackwell Industries. As they worked, John couldn't help but think of Helen. Of her smile, her compassion, her unwavering determination to do what was right. "I'm going to fix this, Helen," he promised silently. "For you, for Sophie, for everyone we've hurt, I promise." And with that promise, John Blackwell embarked on the most important journey of his life, a journey of redemption, truth, and justice. Mr. Davidson's office, Helen's lawyer, was a stark contrast to John's glass and steel empire. Dark wood shelves filled with leather-bound books created an almost claustrophobic atmosphere. The air smelled of old paper and disappointed expectations. John shifted uncomfortably in the worn leather chair, Sophie sitting silently beside him. The lawyer, a middle-aged man, observed them over his reading glasses. "Mr. Blackwell," Mr. Davidson began, his deep voice resonating in the silence. "I must admit I was surprised by your request to unseal Helen's will so abruptly." John nodded stiffly. "I believe I've put this off for too long, Mr. Davidson." The lawyer retrieved a sealed envelope from a drawer. "Helen updated her will just 3 weeks before her passing. She was very specific in her instructions." Hands trembling, John opened the envelope. As he read, his face paled visibly. This isn't possible," he murmured, rereading the pages. Sophie leaned closer, concerned. "What does it say, Mr. Blackwell?" John swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "Helen donated almost our entire fortune to charity, funds for education in Harlem, medical aid for low-income families, housing programs." Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. "There's more, Mr. Blackwell. Helen established a foundation to investigate and expose unethical business practices. She specifically stated that Blackwell Industries should be the first target of this investigation. The shock on John's face was palpable. Memories flooded back, moments that now took on a new and painful meaning. Flashback. 2 months before Helen's death, John arrived home late that evening, exhausted after another day of intense negotiations. He found Helen sitting in the living room, a serious expression on her usually serene face. "John, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm. John sighed, loosening his tie. "Helen, darling, can this wait until tomorrow? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't wait," Helen insisted, standing up. "It's about the company. There's something wrong, John." "Very wrong." He frowned, irritation rising. "What are you talking about?" "The Harlem Project," Helen began, her eyes pleading with him to understand. "People are being evicted without notice, without proper compensation, and the construction sites—" "John, the conditions are inhumane." John shook his head, dismissing her concerns. "Helen, you don't understand how business works. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions for the greater good." "The greater good?" Helen repeated incredulously. "John, we're destroying lives." The argument escalated, voices rising, until John finally exploded. "Enough, Helen. You're my wife, not my business advisor. Mind your own business." The silence that followed was deafening. Helen looked at him, the pain and disappointment evident in her eyes. "You've changed, John," she said softly. "And I'm not sure I like the man you've become." Back in the present, John felt the crushing weight of remorse. How many times had Helen tried to reason with him, and how many times had he pushed her away? "Mr. Blackwell." Sophie's voice brought him back to reality. "Are you all right?" He shook his head, unable to speak. Mr. Davidson continued, his monotone contrasting with the whirlwind of emotions in the room. "There's a personal letter for you, Mr. Blackwell," the lawyer said, handing him a sealed envelope. With trembling fingers, John opened the letter. Helen's elegant handwriting jumped out at him. "My dearest John, if you're reading this, it's because I didn't manage to tell you myself. Forgive me for this final act of cowardice. What I discovered about our company broke my heart. Not because we're going to lose money or our social standing, but because we betrayed the trust of so many people. People like Sophie and her mother, Elise. John, Blackwell Industries is poisoning Harlem, not just metaphorically, but literally. The chemicals used in our construction projects are contaminating the soil and the water. People are getting sick, John. Elise is sick because of us. I know you weren't aware. I want to believe that if you had known, you would have acted. That's why I'm doing this. To give you the chance to make things right, to be the man I know you can be. Please, don't let my death be in vain. Use our fortune. Use your power to do good. Redeem us, John. I have always loved you, and I always will, Helen." John dropped the letter, tears streaming down his face. Sophie, moved by an impulse, took his hand. "Mr. Blackwell," she said softly, "Mrs. Blackwell didn't want to punish you. She wanted you to do what's right." He looked at the young woman, seeing in her all the compassion and strength he had so admired in Helen. "Sophie," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I need you to tell me more about your mother, about her illness." Sophie hesitated, then began to speak. She described Elise's symptoms: constant fatigue, unexplained pains, respiratory problems. All had started shortly after Blackwell Industries began its major construction work in Harlem. John listened, horror growing within him. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in a terrible and undeniable way. "My God," he whispered, "what have we done?" At that moment, an unwavering resolve formed in his mind. There was no more running from the truth or hiding behind ignorance. "Mr. Davidson," John said, straightening in his chair, "I want you to immediately begin the process of transferring the funds according to the provisions of Helen's will." The lawyer blinked, surprised. "Mr. Blackwell, do you understand that this means losing a large part of your personal fortune?" John nodded firmly. "I understand perfectly. And that's exactly what we're going to do." Turning to Sophie, he continued, "As for your mother and the other affected families, We're going to ensure they receive the best possible medical care at Blackwell Industries' expense." Sophie looked at him, her eyes wide with hope and disbelief. "You're really going to do that?" John took the young woman's hands, his voice filled with determination. "Sophie, I promise you, I'm going to fix this. I can't change the past, but I can guarantee a better future. For Helen, for you, for everyone we've hurt." Leaving the lawyer's office, John felt as though an enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with obstacles and sacrifices, but for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. Helen had been right. It was time to be the man she always knew he could be. And with Sophie by his side, reminding him of what truly mattered, John Blackwell was ready to face the challenge of his life, redeeming himself and making a difference in the world he had so long exploited. John Blackwell's private office had been transformed into an investigative headquarters. Whiteboards covered the walls, filled with names, dates, and connections scrawled in colorful marker. In the center of the room, a team of private investigators worked tirelessly, examining documents and cross-referencing information. John Chow, with dark circles under his eyes and a growing beard, observed everything with a mixture of determination and apprehension. Each new discovery was a blow to the heart, but he knew he could no longer retreat. "Mr. Blackwell," one of the investigators called, holding up a file, "we found something on the connection between your wife and Sophie's family." John took the file with trembling hands. As he read, his face paled. Helen wasn't just tutoring. She had created an entire support network for families affected by Blackwell Industries' practices. "My God, Helen," he murmured, "you did all of this right under my nose." At that moment, his phone rang. It was Sophie. "Mr. Blackwell," the girl's voice was urgent. "My mum, she wants to talk to you. She says she's ready to tell everything." John felt his heart race. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." Elise and Sophie's small apartment seemed even smaller with John's imposing presence. Elise, pale and fragile, sat on the sofa, Sophie beside her, holding her hand. "Mr. Blackwell," Elise began, her voice trembling. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. I was afraid. We were all afraid." John knelt before her, his eyes filled with compassion. "Please, Elise, I need to know the truth, the whole truth." Elise took a deep breath and began to speak. She recounted how Helen had arrived in the neighborhood, initially just to tutor. But as she got to know the families and listened to their stories, Helen realized something was terribly wrong. "She started investigating," Elise continued. "At first it was just informal questions, but soon Helen delved into the heart of Blackwell Industries' operations." John listened, each word a fresh wound. Helen had uncovered everything: the illegal evictions, the dangerous working conditions, the environmental contamination. "She created a support group," Sophie interjected, her eyes shining with admiration. "We met twice a week in the church basement. Mrs. Blackwell taught us our rights, helped us document everything." Elise nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She was determined to expose everything, Mr. Blackwell, but she was also afraid." John frowned. "Afraid? Of what?" "Of someone in the company," Elise replied. "She never said who, but in the last few weeks before the accident, Helen was agitated. She said she was close to uncovering something important, something that would change everything." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken implications. John felt a shiver run down his spine. Helen's accident. Could it have been something more? "There's one more thing," Elise said hesitantly. She stood up with difficulty and walked to a drawer, from which she retrieved a flash drive. "Helen left me this. She said it was insurance, in case anything happened to her." John took the flash drive with trembling hands. "What's on it?" "I don't know," Elise admitted. "She just said it was for you, that when the time was right, I would know when to give it to you." Heart pounding, John inserted the flash drive into his laptop. A folder opened, revealing dozens of documents and a single video file. He clicked on it. Helen's face filled the screen. She looked tired, worried, but her eyes still shone with determination. John Dew, she began, her voice soft but firm. If you're watching this, it means something has happened to me, and it means you're finally looking for answers. John felt tears welling up in his eyes. Sophie and Elise watched in silence, respecting the moment. My love, Helen continued, there are so many things I wanted to tell you in person. About what I've discovered, about what our company is doing. John, it's worse than you can imagine. She paused, taking a deep breath. The documents on this drive contain everything I've gathered. Evidence of corruption, criminal negligence, environmental damage. But most importantly, John, someone within the company knows about all of this. Someone close to you is orchestrating everything. John felt his blood run cold. Someone close to him, who could it be? I can't say who it is, Helen continued, as if reading his mind. I don't have concrete proof yet, but I'm close, John. So close. That's why I need you to continue my work. Investigate deeper. Look beyond the surface. The truth is there, waiting to be uncovered. She paused again, her eyes filling with tears. John, I know we've drifted apart these past few years. I know you've lost yourself in the business world, in the pursuit of success. But the man I fell in love with, the good and righteous man I know you are deep down, is still there. Please, find him again. Do what's right. The image flickered, and for a moment, John thought the video was over. But Helen spoke again, her voice now an urgent whisper. One last thing, John. If anything happens to me, don't accept the official story. Question everything. And most importantly, protect Sophie and Elise. They are the key to all of this. The video ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. John sat motionless, tears streaming down his face. Sophie and Elise watched him, a mixture of compassion and expectation in their eyes. Finally, John stood up. His posture had changed. He was no longer the arrogant, blind businessman. In his place stood someone determined, focused, with a clear purpose. Elise, Sophie, he said in a firm voice, I promise you, right here and now, I will get to the bottom of this. I will expose the truth, no matter the cost, and I will protect you as Helen wished. Sophie stepped forward and took John's hand. We believe in you, Mr. Blackwell. Mrs. Blackwell believed in you, and so do we. John nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. We'll do this together, he declared. For Helen, for you, for all the families we've hurt, it's time to make things right. Leaving the apartment, John knew the road ahead would be difficult and dangerous. Someone in his company was behind all of this, someone powerful and ruthless. But with the truth on his side and Helen's legacy guiding his steps, he was ready to face whatever came his way. The battle for the soul of Blackwell Industries, and for John's own redemption, had just begun. The clock on John's office wall read 3:22 a.m., but sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. Stacks of documents covered his desk, computer screens flickered with charts and spreadsheets, and a half-empty bottle of whiskey sat beside him, untouched. John rubbed his tired eyes, his growing beard scratching his hand. The past few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, each new discovery challenging everything he thought he knew about his company and himself. How could I have been so blind, he murmured, staring at a photo of Helen on his desk. Her radiant smile now seemed accusatory, a constant reminder of his failure to see what was happening right under his nose. An email caught his attention. It was from Anthony, his partner and best friend for decades. John, we need to talk about your investigations. You're making the board nervous. John felt a knot forming in his stomach. Anthony had always been his rock within the company, the man he trusted to handle the details while he focused on the big picture. But now, that trust was shaken. Determined, John picked up his phone. It was time to take drastic measures. The next morning, Sophie and Elise arrived at the Blackwell mansion, suitcases in hand and expressions of astonishment on their faces. Mr. Blackwell, Elise began hesitantly, are you sure about this? We don't want to impose. John raised his hand, gently interrupting her. Please, Elise, call me John. And you're not imposing. You're honored guests. And most importantly, you'll be safe here. Sophie looked around, her eyes wide with wonder at the luxury. This is... Wow. John smiled, his first genuine smile in weeks. Come on, let me show you to your rooms. As he led the mother and daughter through the mansion, John couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between this world of opulence and the reality of Harlem. Guilt gnawed at him again, but he pushed it aside. This wasn't the time for self-pity, it was time for action. Back in his office, John immersed himself in the inner workings of Blackwell Industries. With the help of a small team of trusted accountants and lawyers, he began unearthing years of financial records. The discrepancies started small. A misplaced digit here, a questionable transaction there. But as they dug deeper, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. "Mr. Blackwell," one of the accountants called, his voice trembling. "I think we've found something." John approached, his heart pounding. On the computer screen, a series of seemingly innocuous transactions for consultations and special services, but the amounts were astronomical, and the recipient companies didn't exist. "My God," John whispered, "it's money laundering." The accountant nodded grimly. "And there's more, sir. These payments, they were all authorized by Mr. Anthony." John's world seemed to crumble. Anthony, his closest friend, his confidant. How was this possible? But the evidence was irrefutable. As they continued their investigation, more and more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Bribery of officials, falsification of environmental reports, elaborate schemes to circumvent regulations. John felt sick to his stomach. Each new revelation was like a stab to the heart. How could he have not seen this happening? How could he have been so naive? That night, unable to sleep, John wandered the halls of the mansion. His footsteps led him to the library, where he found Sophie sitting in an armchair, a thick book in her lap. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. Sophie looked up, startled. "Sorry, John. I've never seen so many books before." John smiled sadly and sat beside her. "You know, Helen loved this room. She always said books were windows to other worlds." Sophie closed the book, her eyes fixed on John. "You loved her very much, didn't you?" "More than words can say," John replied, his voice choked with emotion. "And now I realize I failed her in so many ways." There was a moment of silence, heavy with unspoken emotions. Then Sophie asked the question John had been dreading. "What have you discovered about the company?" John hesitated. Part of him wanted to protect Sophie from the sordid truth. But another part, the part Helen had always encouraged, knew that honesty was the only way. "It's worse than we imagined, Sophie," he admitted. "The corruption. It's everywhere. And it seems my best friend is at the heart of it all." Sophie reached out and gently touched John's arm. "Mrs. Blackwell always said that the truth can hurt, but it's the only path to healing." John felt tears welling up in his eyes. "She was very wise, wasn't she?" Sophie nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "And she believed in you, John. She knew that when you discovered the truth, you would do what's right." At that moment, looking into Sophie's hopeful eyes, John felt something shift within him. The guilt and despair that had been consuming him gave way to a fierce determination. "You're right, Sophie," he said, standing up. "It's time to do what's right." Back in his office, John picked up the phone. It was time to confront Anthony, to demand answers. But before he could dial the number, he noticed something strange. A plain brown envelope, with no markings or stamps, had been slipped under his door. Heart pounding, John opened it. Inside, he found a series of documents, secret contracts, coded emails, compromising photos, and on top of it all, a handwritten note. "Johnny, if you're reading this, it's because you're finally asking the right questions. Helen wasn't the only one who noticed something was wrong. Be careful. They're watching you. A friend." John sat heavily in his chair, the reality of the situation hitting him with full force. This wasn't just about Anthony. There was an entire conspiracy within Blackwell Industries, a network of corruption and greed that extended far beyond what he could have imagined. Staring at Helen's photo, John made a silent promise. He would expose everything, no matter the personal cost. He would clear his company's name and honor his wife's legacy. The battle for the soul of Blackwell Industries had just begun, and John Blackwell was finally ready to fight. The Paris sky was grey that morning, mirroring the turmoil in John Blackwell's heart. He stood before the expansive windows of his office in the Blackwell Tower, gazing at the city he had helped shape, now with a very different perspective. The phone on his desk rang, interrupting his somber thoughts. It was his secretary. "Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Lefebvre has arrived for the meeting." Using Lefebvre here as a common French last name, keeping it consistent with previous adaptations, and assuming this is a different Lefebvre than the lawyer. John closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his courage. "Thank you, Sarah. Send him in, please." The door opened, and Anthony entered, his usual smile plastered on his face. "John, my old friend, glad we can finally chat. Your investigations are making everyone nervous." John turned slowly, fixing his gaze on the man he had considered his best friend for decades. Now, he saw something different in Anthony's eyes. Something cold, calculating. "Sit down, Anthony," John said, his voice controlled. "We have a lot to discuss." Anthony settled into a chair, still smiling. Of course. What exactly did you want to talk about?" John didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pressed a button on his phone. "Sarah, please hold all calls and don't let anyone in." Anthony's smile faltered slightly. "John, what's going on?" John sat down and placed a thick file on the table. "Tell me, Anthony, when did you decide to betray our friendship and everything we built together?" The silence that followed was deafening. Anthony's eyes narrowed, all pretense of cordiality gone. So, you finally figured it out," he said in a cold voice. "I must say, it took you longer than I expected." John felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Despite all the evidence, a part of him had still hoped for an explanation, a misunderstanding. But Anthony's casual admission shattered that last shred of hope. "Why, Anthony?" John asked, his voice trembling with anger and pain. "Why do this?" Anthony laughed, a mirthless sound. "Why, for the money, of course. For the power. Did you really think we could build an empire of this size by playing by the rules?" Memories flooded John's mind. Flashback, 5 years earlier. "John, think about it," Anthony said, leaning across the conference table. "If we take these shortcuts, we can increase our profits by 30%. John frowned. "But what about the environmental regulations?" Anthony smiled reassuringly. "Leave it to me. I have contacts who can expedite things." Flashback, 3 years earlier. "Helen is asking awkward questions about the Harlem project," Anthony remarked casually during a round of golf. John sighed. "She's worried about the displaced families." Anthony placed a hand on John's shoulder. "Women have soft hearts, John. We can't let emotions interfere with business. Perhaps it would be best to keep her busy with other projects, away from the company." Back in the present, John felt a wave of nausea. "You manipulated me this whole time." Anthony shrugged. "It was surprisingly easy. You were so focused on being the great visionary that you never paid attention to the details. I took care of everything, remember?" John opened the file and spread the documents across the table. "You took care of everything. Money laundering, bribery, falsifying environmental reports. That's taking care of everything." "That's how business is done in the real world, John," Anthony retorted, his voice hard. "Tas, while you were worried about being the company's pretty face, I was making sure we stayed on top." John stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward, "At the expense of innocent lives. People are sick because of us, Anthony. Families have been destroyed." Anthony stood up as well, his eyes blazing with cold fury. "Collateral damage, John. You can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs." It was then that a terrible suspicion began to form in John's mind. "Helen," he murmured. "She found out, didn't she? That's why—" Anthony's expression hardened. Helen was a threat. She was poking around where she shouldn't have been, asking dangerous questions. John felt his blood run cold. "How did you killed her?" For a moment, Anthony looked genuinely surprised. "Kill her? No, John. I'm not a murderer. Helen's accident was just that, an accident. Although," he paused, a cruel smile playing on his lips, "I must admit it was convenient." Rage exploded within John. In an instant, He was on Anthony, grabbing him by the collar. "You monster! How could you? She trusted you. I trusted you." Anthony didn't resist, his smile never wavering. "And that was your mistake, John. Trust has no place in business." With a superhuman effort, John controlled himself, releasing Anthony and stepping back. "It's over, Anthony. I'm going to expose everything, every lie, every dirty deal." Anthony calmly adjusted his tie. "I really think you can. Think again, John. I built this empire as much as you did. I have powerful allies, compromising information on people in high places. If I go down, I'm taking half of New York with me." "I don't care," John growled. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Anthony sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Ah, John, always the idealist. Fine, do what you think you have to do, but remember, you have blood on your hands too. Maybe not directly, but your negligence, your willful blindness, made you an accomplice." With those words, Anthony turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked over his shoulder. "Oh, and John, keep your new friends close. You never know what can happen in this dangerous city." The veiled threat made John's blood boil. "If you so much as touch a hair on Sophie or Elise's heads..." Anthony laughed. "Me? Don't be dramatic, John. But accidents do happen, don't they?" With that, he was gone, leaving John alone with the crushing weight of the truth. John sank into his chair, his head in his hands. The enormity of what he faced hit him with full force. This wasn't just about saving his company or clearing his name. It was about justice for Helen, protection for Sophie and Elise, and redemption for himself. He looked at Helen's picture on his desk, her eyes bright and full of life. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I let you down. But I promise you, I'm going to fix this, whatever the cost." With renewed determination, John picked up the phone. It was time to gather allies, to prepare for the battle of his life. The fight for the soul of Blackwell Industries and for his own soul had just begun. And this time, John Blackwell would not back down. The sun rose over New York City, casting a golden glow on the Blackwell Tower. On the 50th floor, John Blackwell watched the city awaken, his reflection in the glass showing a changed man. The past few months had been a roller coaster of revelations, confrontations and difficult decisions. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Blackwell." "They've arrived." John turned and nodded to his assistant. "Thank you, Sarah. Please show them to the conference room." A few minutes later, John entered the room where a team of FBI agents and prosecutors awaited him. Among them, he recognized prosecutor Alexandra Moreau, known for her unwavering integrity. "Ladies and gentlemen," John began in a firm voice, "thank you for coming. Today we take the final step in righting years of corporate wrongdoing and criminal activity. For hours, John meticulously laid out every detail of the conspiracy Anthony had orchestrated. He presented documents, emails, recordings, a comprehensive record of Blackwell Industries' illicit activities. Prosecutor Moreau watched him intently. "Mr. Blackwell, do you understand that by providing us with this information, you are implicating yourself in several of these crimes?" John nodded solemnly. "I understand perfectly, Madam Prosecutor, and I am prepared to face the consequences of my negligence and passive complicity." One of the agents spoke up. "Why now, Mr. Blackwell? Why reveal all of this after so long?" John closed his eyes for a moment, the image of Helen vivid in his mind. "Because it's the right thing to do, because we've already caused too much damage. And because," his voice cracked slightly, "I owe it to the memory of my wife and to the people we've hurt." The meeting stretched on for hours. Finally, Prosecutor Moreau stood up. "Mr. Blackwell, your cooperation will be taken into consideration. But be prepared. The coming months will be difficult." John nodded. "I'm ready, Madam Prosecutor. It's time to face the music." In the weeks that followed, Blackwell Industries became the center of a media firestorm. Headlines screamed about corruption, environmental fraud, and collusion with government officials. Anthony and several other executives were arrested, and the company faced multiple investigations and lawsuits. Amidst the chaos, John worked tirelessly to implement radical changes. At a landmark press conference, he announced, "From this day forward, Blackwell Industries is embracing a new mission. Our focus will no longer be solely on profit, but on the positive impact we can have on our communities and the environment." He detailed a series of initiatives: an independent ethics board, full transparency in operations, massive investments in green technologies, and, most importantly, a comprehensive compensation program for all victims of the company's past practices. Behind the scenes, Sophie and Elise became key players in this transformation. With John's guidance, they helped establish the Helen Blackwell Foundation, dedicated to supporting families affected by predatory gentrification and industrial pollution-related health issues. One sunny afternoon, John met with Sophie in the foundation's new office, formerly a lavish boardroom, now transformed into a welcoming and functional space. "How are things going here?" he asked, watching Sophie organize stacks of documents. Sophie smiled, and her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Incredibly well, John. We received over 500 applications for the scholarship program this week." John felt a surge of pride. "Helen would be so happy to see this. She'd be proud of you too, you know," Sophie said softly, "for doing the right thing, even when it was hard." John nodded, feeling a lump forming in his throat. "Thank you, Sophie. That means a lot to me." Just then, Elise entered the room carrying a stack of brochures. "John, I'm glad you're here. We need your approval for the launch of the community health program." As they discussed the program details, John couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed. A few months ago, he would have been in board meetings, discussing strategies to maximize profits. Now, here he was, planning how to improve the lives of the people his company had wronged. The defining moment came a few weeks later, at the official launch of the Blackwell Restitution Program. The company auditorium was filled with affected families, journalists, and employees. John stepped onto the stage, feeling the weight of all eyes upon him. He took a deep breath and began, "Good morning, everyone. We are gathered here today not to celebrate, but to acknowledge the mistakes of the past and to take a crucial step towards righting those wrongs." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. He saw faces etched with pain, with struggle, but also with hope. The Blackwell Restitution Program is not charity. It is a moral imperative. It is the least we can do to begin to repair the damage we have caused. John detailed the program: lifetime medical care for those affected by health problems linked to the company's activities, financial compensation for displaced families, scholarships for children, and job retraining programs. "But more than money or services," he continued, his voice choked with emotion, "we offer our unwavering commitment to do better, to be better. Blackwell Industries, today and in the future, will be a company that puts people and the planet before profits." At the end of his speech, something unexpected happened. An elderly woman in the front row slowly stood up. For a tense moment, John feared a negative reaction, but then she began to applaud. Gradually, others joined in until the entire auditorium was on its feet, in a moving ovation. Tears streamed down John's face as he left the stage. Backstage, he found Sophie and Elise waiting for him. "You did it, John," Elise said, hugging him tightly. "It's just the beginning." Sophie, her eyes shining with tears, added, "Mrs. Blackwell would be so proud." John hugged them both, feeling a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and hope. The road ahead would still be long and arduous. There would be lawsuits, financial challenges, and the daunting task of rebuilding public trust. But for the first time in a long time, John Blackwell felt he was on the right path. Not just to redeem himself and save his company, but to truly honor Helen's legacy and make a real difference in the world. As they left the auditorium, John looked at the New York City skyline through the windows. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. A new day would dawn tomorrow, bringing new challenges, but also new opportunities to do good. And John was ready to face them, one step at a time, on the path of justice and redemption. Snow fell softly on New York City, transforming it into a winter wonderland. At the Blackwell mansion, twinkling lights and the aroma of freshly baked cookies created a warm atmosphere, a stark contrast to the coldness that had once permeated the house. John Blackwell stood before the large living room window, watching the snowflakes dance in the air. His reflection in the glass showed a transformed man. His eyes, once hardened by ambition, now shone with a newfound serenity. His graying beard, neatly trimmed, framed a gentle smile, a rare sight just a year ago. "John," Sophie's cheerful voice echoed through the house. "Come see. Mom and I finished decorating the tree." With a smile, John walked towards the main living room, where a majestic Christmas tree stood proudly. Elise and Sophie stood before it, admiring their handiwork. "It's beautiful," he said, hugging them both. "Helen would have loved it." Helen's name, once a painful taboo, was now spoken frequently and with affection. Her presence, though physically absent, permeated every aspect of their lives. Elise smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She would be so proud of you, John. Of all of us." John nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he thought of his late wife. "You're right. Helen always believed we could be better. Do better." Sophie, now 13 and growing fast, picked up a special ornament from the tree. It was a small replica of the Blackwell Tower, but with a crucial difference. Instead of the company logo, a heart was engraved at the base. "Remember when we made this?" she asked, smiling at John. He chuckled, taking the ornament. "How could I forget? It was the day we announced the company's restructuring." The past year had been a roller coaster of emotions and changes. After exposing the corruption within Blackwell Industries, John had faced months of investigations, trials, and public scrutiny. There were times he thought all was lost, that the weight of his past mistakes would crush him. But with Elise and Sophie's unwavering support, and guided by Helen's legacy, he had persevered. Blackwell Industries had undergone a radical transformation. The focus was no longer solely on profit, but on the positive impact they could have on the world. "You know," John began, sitting down on the sofa and inviting Elise and Sophie to join him, "I was thinking about how much our lives have changed this past year." Elise took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "For the better, without a doubt." Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Totally. Remember how we were last Christmas? I barely knew you, John." "And now? And now we're a family," John finished, his voice thick with emotion. The silence that followed was comforting, filled with gratitude and love. Finally, Elise stood up. "Well, this tree isn't going to decorate itself with presents. Shall we start putting them under?" As they arranged the presents under the tree, John couldn't help but reflect on the less tangible gifts they had received throughout the year. The Helen Blackwell Foundation, created to help families affected by the company's former practices, had flourished beyond his wildest expectations. "Sophie," John called, picking up an envelope from his desk, "I have something for you." The young woman took the envelope, curious. As she opened it, her eyes widened. "This is—" John nodded, smiling. "Yes, the adoption papers. If you still want it, of course." Sophie threw her arms around John, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Of course I want it. You've already been my dad in my heart for a long time." Elise watched the scene, deeply moved. John reached out to her, pulling her into the embrace. "And for you, my love, I have a very important question to ask." Kneeling down, John pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Elise, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Elise's yes was barely audible between her sobs of joy, but the kiss that followed was more than enough of an answer. That evening, after a festive dinner and much laughter, the new Blackwell family prepared for their most important tradition, a visit to Helen's grave. The cemetery was silent, the snow muffling all sounds. Helen's headstone, covered in a thin layer of snow, seemed to glow under the moonlight. John knelt down and gently wiped away the snow. "Hello, my love," he whispered. "We have so much to tell you." Sophie stepped forward and placed a bouquet of white roses, Helen's favorite, on the grave. "Mrs. Blackwell, we're officially going to be a family now. Mr. Blackwell, Dad is going to adopt me." Elise, tears in her eyes, added, "And we are getting married, Helen. I know this is what you would have wanted for us." John spoke again, his voice choked with emotion. "The foundation is doing incredible work, my love. We've already helped over 1,000 families this year. We're truly making the difference you always dreamed of." They stood there for a long moment, each lost in their thoughts and memories. Helen's presence seemed almost palpable, enveloping them in an ethereal embrace of approval and love. Finally, John stood up and wiped his tears. "It's time to go home. Helen always said Christmas should be celebrated in joy, not in sadness." As they walked back to the car, the snow began to fall more heavily. Sophie laughed, trying to catch the snowflakes on her tongue. Elise smiled, her face radiating in a way John had never seen before. "You know," John said, "I've been thinking about something important." Elise and Sophie looked at him, curious. "Blackwell Industries will be celebrating its 50th anniversary next month," he continued, "and I think it's time for an even more profound change." "What kind of change?" Elise asked. John smiled. "How about changing the company's name? Blackwell carries a lot of history, not all of it positive. Maybe it's time for a fresh start, Soompa, with a name that reflects who we are now and who we want to be in the future." Sophie jumped up and down excitedly. "We could call it Helen Enterprises, or the New Beginnings Foundation." Elise laughed. "I think we'll need a few brainstorming sessions for that." John hugged them both, feeling a surge of gratitude and love. "We have time. We have all the time in the world now." Arriving back at the house, the mansion welcomed them with its warmth and light. John paused at the entrance, watching Elise and Sophie walk in, laughing and discussing ideas for the new company name. At that moment, he had a revelation. This house, once a symbol of his ambition and isolation, had been transformed into a true home, a place of love, forgiveness, and second chances. "Helen," he whispered, looking up at the starry sky, "I hope you're proud. I promise to continue your legacy, to do good, and to love with all my heart." A gentle breeze brushed against his face, almost like an answer. John smiled, knowing that, in a way, Helen was there with them. Stepping inside, John joined his family around the Christmas tree. As they exchanged the last of the presents and made plans for the future, he felt truly at peace for the first time in years. The road ahead would still be challenging. Transforming a company the size of Blackwell Industries wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles, doubts, and certainly resistance. But looking at Elise and Sophie, John knew he could face anything. Together, they weren't just building a new family or reforming a company. They were creating a legacy of love, ethics, and compassion that would extend far beyond their lifetimes. As the snow continued to fall outside, inside the Blackwell, the Dubois home, the warmth of love and hope shone brighter than all the Christmas lights. It truly was a new beginning for all of them.